Much like that child Arteta helped off the pitch that one time, I'm about to wonder what the hell I'm doing here. This is the Arsenal Vision Post-Match Podcast. My name's Elliot, speaking about mentoring and hello, everybody. Love you for being here. This is one I'm very excited to be a part of, he says, wondering if he's really a part of it, loosely involved in, helping to moderate, getting in the way of. You can be the judge of all of those things, because this is a tactics summit. That's right. Much like two great nations that get together to solve the problems of the world, or some might say cause the problems of the world, we are going to get two great minds together and discuss the tactical innovations happening at Arsenal, around the league, maybe a little bit about Liverpool, and whatever else comes up while I'm busy scrolling on my phone. But you are going to love this because it's not going to feature me. I mean, I will say I've been looking for the right audio vehicle to get my deep tactical insights out to the community. This is not that. What this is a chance for me to welcome Clive. Hello, Clive.
Hello, hello.
How you doing?
Good, Elliot.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. That's a good start. And the man with the big brain and the tactical insight for The Athletic, Jon MacKenzie. Hello, John.
Hello, hello, hello. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is a pleasure to have you here. And I have to say, I was preparing this episode, like the container that I'm going to put it in, and I tagged it Jon MacKenzie. And a Jon MacKenzie tag came up as having been previously used, which suggests to me that we've podcasted before. And I want to be the first to apologize to you for having no recollection of that happening, or for having tagged something with your name when we did not actually have you on the podcast. So whichever one that is, I apologize for it either way. Do you know? Am I living in a wormhole? What's going on?
I don't know. I have a vague recollection that maybe I did just like a section of something for you at one point, but I also have no recollection of that happening either, so don't feel bad on your part.
We're men of a certain age. Okay, well, you guys have brought the insight. I have brought the hair, and we are ready to talk some football. So I think the first topic that we want to cover, and these are all sort of broad, so obviously whichever way the conversation goes, is perfectly fine. This is sort of I think a guide for this, but Arsenal are evolving. The squad is deeper. There are more traits in the squad, which gives Mikel Arteta more ways to set up and try to create leverage against the opposition, to solve problems in ways that maybe we couldn't last season, especially when, as Mikel just said recently, he would look on his bench and there were academy kids who had never played a professional football match. So I'll start with you, John. Early doors still, but how do you see the evolution of Arsenal this season tactically?
Yeah, it's funny that you say like the emphasis has been on evolution this season, because I would say Mikel Arteta is probably one of the most evolutionary coaches in the Premier League. I don't need to tell you guys that, you know it, but I think what's interesting when you look through Arteta's timeline at Arsenal is that almost every phase comes with some kind of catalytic moment, it feels like to me, where he recognizes an issue and then fixes it. And yeah, I think that the current iteration is responding to some of the issues that we've seen maybe across the last couple of seasons. And I think we could talk about this in probably two different ways. We could talk about the evolution of Arsenal and the problems that maybe Arsenal faced in the last couple of seasons. But I think there's a bigger meta-tactical shift taking place at the moment as well. And I think that some of the evolution that's happening right now kind of responds to some of the topics that are happening there. But yeah, as far as I can see it from the big picture view from the Arsenal side, this is in many respects Arteta's attempt to come to terms with some of the stuff we've talked about in the last few seasons in terms of chance creation in open play. And I think if we talk about his evolution, you can go back to the famous game against Manchester City, the 4-1 loss, where it felt as though that prompted Arteta into a more conservative defensive evolution, or at least physical would be better, like a realization that in order to play the way that he wants to play, certain steps had to be taken to make sure that Arsenal were solid enough to be able to press and control games in the way that they wanted to. And I think what we're seeing now is the flip side of that, which is having lent into that side of things. Maybe that has raised questions about chance creation, particularly in open play. Obviously, set pieces have been a really useful source of goals for Arsenal. But I think Arteta wants to get more out of open play, and I think that's where this current evolution is coming from. I would call it an attempt to play more directly. And that would bring us, I think, necessarily to this wider tactical meta shift that we're seeing now, which I would say is that in the past, the big teams could control games in a certain way. And that usually looked like being able to possess the ball, dominate possession, but also dominate territory. So have the capacity to force teams high up the pitch. And again, this is what we see from Arsenal under Arteta. Almost force them back into their own box, create a low block to break down, and then you optimize the ability to break down these low blocks, but also to defend transitions, because those are the most dangerous and probable attacks from that kind of situation. And I think what's happened is that it used to be the case that Guardiola, for example, could do just a one-size-fits-all tactical approach across the last 15 years where teams would fall back into that low block. And so, you could just optimize for that situation and make yourself essentially unbeatable. And that's why over the last 15 years, Guardiola has won almost everything very regularly. But I think what we're starting to see now is the underdog teams fighting back. And that sort of goes hand in hand with that maybe that more physical shift that we were talking about with respect to Arsenal. That's something that's happening, I think, across the league. So in the Premier League now, some of the smaller teams are making sure that they have the capacity to be able to control games out of possession a little bit more. So we will see teams pressing higher. We see man-to-man ideas way more prevalent than they've been for the last couple of decades. Mid-block's much more active, and the result is that the elite teams struggle to control games in the way that they used to. It's much harder to, I think, break down low blocks as well. And so I think the solution to that is that with teams pressing higher up the pitch, the space that can be accessed when you have possession of the ball has changed. So it used to be that teams would drop off and allow you to have the ball. Now they're taking the initiative a lot more. That makes games a lot more chaotic, harder to control, and the spaces open out in between the lines of the defending team's midfield and defence. Those are the areas now that teams are starting to try and target in their build-up. And I think as a result, necessarily it speeds up their play, and it's much easier to get into those areas if you can play more directly. So I think that's the shift that Arteta has seen on a meta level, and it's a shift that he reckons can help Arsenal to be more productive in open play. And I think from the basis of what I've seen so far this season, that has been a productive shift for Arsenal. I think Arsenal look much better this season in certain phases, and I think in general, what we're talking about here really is tactical diversity. It used to be the case that the big teams had to play in just a certain way and get very good at it. Now there's lots more challenges facing them, and I think the elite teams who are going to survive are the elite teams who can mix up their approaches a little bit. And I think that's what this is about for Arsenal, adding another element to what they're doing. So it's not a complete revolution, it's an evolution in a direction.
And maybe the way you support tactical diversity is profile diversity. And that might also explain some of the squad building approach we've taken, where we've gone deep and with different profiles. I mean, we haven't seen Kai yet, but Kai isn't Gyökeres. You can play different ways with those two. So profile diversity enables tactical diversity. There's a couple of things real quick before I bounce it back to you, Clive, that I want to hit on that you mentioned, John, that I think are interesting. First of all, you talked about the importance of set pieces for helping to break down these low blocks. And it's kind of ironic because Slot literally just discussed that in his pre-match press conference, saying we haven't been effective at that yet, but that is a tool for breaking down low blocks. We want to do it. Another thing I'll note, we're not in the Liverpool section, but as you talk about these big clubs being able to go long early and be more direct, I actually think Liverpool have changed and tried to be more deliberate and play slower and be in fewer sort of basketball games up and down the pitch, which is interesting. But Clive, we're obviously keen Arsenal watchers here, and we watched a lot of preseason, had the chance to see them in Singapore, and the thing that struck me right away at the beginning of the preseason, we're trying to go more direct. We're trying to go over the top early, big switches and things like that. I mean, we saw a beautiful switch from Eze to Saka just the other night that led to a great chance. And one of the things that's hard about evaluating our tactical evolution is because of the players that haven't been available, like Saka, like Odegaard, like Kai Havertz, we're seeing what's been possible with who's available, but we haven't totally seen the range of that possibility. So what's your take on John's position on this and the extent to which we may even see a little bit more of a shift now that some of the key players who were absent are back in the mix?
Yeah, you have to look at what's driving the shift, and John touched on the physicality side of things. Leeds are a good example. Look at the buys they made in pre-season, all like 6 foot plus. And so I always say this line, there's no shortage of sports science in the Premier League. People understand how strong you are, how physical you are. So what happens when everyone's the same size, can sprint the same speed, etc., etc.? It's all about how you manipulate space, isn't it? I loved your recent video, John, about how we make the pitch bigger now. And so from my red seat, North Bank end of the ground, I see a double pivot appearing. I see Declan Rice and Zubimendi taking turns to drop in. I'm thinking, this is great. And they're switching the ball out wide. And suddenly the wingers, they're not 3-on-1, they're like 1-on-1. How's this happening? You know, and we look like we're running downhill. And so direct is one thing, but why are we doing it? And I love where you highlight the spaces that we're trying to access. I almost feel as though the tactical shift of football is coming towards our strengths, because we have really good distributors at the back. If they get pressed, we've got our +1 with our goalkeeper, who's not a bad distributor himself. And so if people are going to jump onto us, we are capable of going to the wide or going over it and then getting our 4-on-4 at the back there. And I kept seeing this, particularly in the Forest game. And I came out of there going, this is like perfection, tactical perfection. And I was concerned about how we would develop our next phase, because, again, you highlight this really, really well. We are like a peppish team with maybe a few more muscles, so we can press people into spaces, and we actually created our own problem. We created low block game after low block game after low block game. And so, again, I sit North Bank end and we kick to the clock end every game. I'm thinking, I've got a season ticket here and I'm only seeing half a game. It's up the other end, you know, and it felt like that every single week. And I was unsure how we would develop on. But I do think with the addition of transitional players that we've added, a little bit more direct behaviours. And I know people look at Gyökeres, for example, but in those pre-season games, what I was looking for, when we go into transition, offensive transition, what are our behaviours? Do we stand to separate, to receive the ball, to then knock it back and get into offensive shape before we go? Or do we just go? And I kept seeing Shorts going the other direction. I thought, okay, there's a shift here now. The message is, when that ball switches, just go. And that felt like Liverpool last year. I mean, they were running downhill continuously. I kept saying, how is their pitch so big and ours isn't? You know, that was confusing to me. And so to see those behaviours change and then continually find targets around the corner, first time, second time, we are now playing against unsettled defences, which hopefully will lead to open play goals. And I know we get a lot of focus, John, on set pieces, etc., but that's a byproduct of owning territory. Mm-hmm. And if you are in a certain area all the time, you are going to get corners and throw-ins and things like that. And I thought that was a really smart from Arteta to do that. But everyone's on set pieces now. Everyone's got big blokes and everyone's got set piece coaches. And so you have to be really, really good at it. So I do think open play creation is almost like something we took for norm, like we're just going to happen. But actually, I think it's gold. And I read something the other day that creation numbers across the league are down in open play. And I think because of that physical competitiveness, good coaching, globalization of coaching, I'm just seeing this change. It's almost coming towards us, you know. And I find that exciting. Obviously, it could be a bias, but I find it really interesting also.
Well, Scott's been posting some interesting data work that's been done, and forgive me for the original author's name who escapes me right at the moment, but actually showing that for every reduction in 0.1 XG allowed, you actually increase your expected points more than for every 0.1 XG for. Let me restate that in English. Essentially, that being better defensively, incremental improvements defensively actually lead to more point gains than incremental improvements in attack. And I think we've overlooked that a bit because there's been anxiety around our attacking output at Arsenal, but it's still the case that a robust and stalwart defense is a great base from which to build a title-winning team. And that's why we've been so close over the last few seasons. John, one thing, though, that does happen as you start to play inside the block more and you get these games that maybe are a little more open is you have vulnerability. And there was an interesting passage in the Newcastle game when we're chasing the game, and Saka and Eze exchanged passes right at the top of the box in a central space. And Saka maybe held it a little too long and had it taken from him, and it led to Jacob Murphy streaming up the other end. And Declan Rice did a brilliant job to chase him down. I think this is the central tension for Mikel Arteta. because the way we play when we're pushed up and we're owning that territory, if we do lose possession in central spaces, that's when you can get countered on with those quick counters. And the team that has really suffered from that, I think, is Pep's Manchester City team. Why have you seen teams countering on them so effectively? Because they do attack central areas so aggressively. They will lose the ball there, and they've not had the ability to control counterattacks. So how do you see that tension resolve in terms of playing inside the block more so you're not just in the horseshoe of death setup, but not leaving yourself vulnerable in a way that City have massively over the last couple of seasons?
Yeah. Before I get to that, the guy you're talking about is Lewis. His blog is Between the Lines. It's a very good piece, so I recommend people.
On the XG for and against. Yeah. So Lewis, Between the Lines. There you go. Thank you for that, John. I apologize.
No. Every manager struggles with the balance of attack and defense, right? Or every good manager certainly should. And I think maybe the frustration that I've had watching Arsenal in the last few seasons is that you have such an overrated defensive team that. And I say overrated in the sense of like it does more than it should. It is designed to do more than it should. Overpowered.
Everyone's eyebrows went up then when you said that.
Sorry. And why do we have this guy on the pod? This was a mistake.
And I'm, you know me, I'm the first person to rave about Arsenal's out of possession. So let's just get that on the table now. But I think you only have to do so much with your defense. Your defense only has to provide a benchmark for your attack to. Play to, right? Whenever people say to me, defense is whatever it is, attacks win your games, defenses win your titles, I always push back and I say all your defense ever has to do is enough for your attack to be efficient. Pep Guardiola is a great example of that. I think that his teams have always been very good defensively until the last few seasons. But because he optimizes for attack, it slightly changes what he expects of them. And the frustration for me was more that Arsenal, I think, could have done more in terms of taken more risks because they had the perfect structure, they had the perfect profiles of players to be able to deal with any sort of attacks in the opposite direction. And I think that's why I'm so excited about Arsenal this season, because I think this season we are starting to see that balance maybe moved a bit more in favor of the direction that I would prefer to see. Maybe that's just me being selfish as a neutral. I know you guys will be very comforted by the fact that you have a very strong defensive team. But yeah, in terms of as I understand it, the question you're asking is with Arsenal being patient, then and as a result of that, often having to move the ball into the wide areas and break down low blocks in the way that I sort of have termed it as being almost like doing set pieces but in open play. One of the upsides you get from that is that you do not very often receive those counterattacks in dangerous situations. But I think that what we're starting to see now is and the reason why teams build up slowly is in order precisely to build those rest defense structures that can make you so hard to counter on. So I suppose the necessary question that we should ask of Arsenal now is, what difference will it make them playing more directly on the opposition's ability to counterattack more dangerously? And I think in answer to that question, it's pretty clear that it's definitely in favour of the way that Arsenal are playing right now. I don't think the games where, and again, I want to emphasize, I think this is all about tactical diversity. The beauty of what Arsenal can do right now is they can play in different ways against different teams. So in some games, you'll see maybe more of a single pivot in terms of the rest defense structure with the 2H pushed a little bit higher on, and then maybe the fullbacks inverting and giving a little bit more coverage in the middle. Or you can do what you did against Newcastle, which was have a double pivot and then fullbacks that can go forward. You have the capacity now, I think, to be discerning about the way that you want to attack, and that allows you to be discerning about the way you want to defend if you lose the ball in those situations. So I think that's what's so impressed me about Arsenal this season, is that there is the capacity now to look at the opponent and say, is this an opponent who will cause us problems in transition? If so, let's put the personnel on the field that will allow us to mitigate that, and it will allow us to have as much attacking as we need, as much defending as we need, getting the balance right, not across the course of a season, but across the course of individual games. And I think that's what's been so interesting for me about Arsenal this season.
Yeah, Clive?
Yeah, I love listening to John. I was thinking back to your video again, John. You highlighted the Forest game really, really well, but the game was even excited me even more, the Newcastle one, because of how we approached it differently, and to see almost us play like a 5 in midfield, almost around their midfield 3, which is their strong point, and just put a blanket over them, and just have proximity of attacking mid players bouncing the ball to each other. It's sort of, they thought we were going to go wide. They thought we were going to get Saka on the sideline and give him a good kicking like they normally do, and tell him to get up and no yellow cards.
Got pretty good
here.
Kicking in the first minute, to be fair.
Yeah, he did. It's okay. It's what happens in Newcastle. Get up, my son. We're up north now, right? So, and I was so impressed at how we went down the centre, how Trossard narrowed in. And I'm thinking to the future when Odegaard and Eze on the same pitch at the same time, and Eze maybe doing that Trossard role, and the two of them together like double tens behind a forward that sprints away, fullbacks cradling the whole system. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, we're going down the middle, and we don't do this. And of course, when you got proximity, you've got the chance to counter press and get the ball and foul and say, sorry, ref, I'm only a little Trossard, don't book me, sort of thing. So, and so I found that one as exciting as the Forest one when we stretched them out a little bit and started running downhill. And so it's incredible. Suddenly, this team that was so right-sided biased has got a left side. We can go to wide areas still. We can pull people on and go over. We can go down the middle. And we're only like 6 games in. And it's like, oh, wow. And one of our most tactically influential players, in my humble opinion, he says, now waiting for the comments, give him a smashing, is Kai Havertz, who can do a lot of things. And he's developing a stretching game. He's also far better technically on the ball than Gyökeres is when he's facing his own goal and a hold-up. Yeah. And so we have got a lot. And it's like dawning on me that actually we could be quite good. You know, and I've got less to moan about. Even Elliot's got less to moan about. So it's quite interesting.
Don't speak on my behalf. Yeah.
Coming back to the difference between the Forest game and the Newcastle game, I think what's so interesting for me about those is that both of those games are games where you've set up to be direct, but in very different ways. So in the Forest game, it's, as I highlighted in that video you mentioned, it's using incredible amount of Roberto De Zerbi principles to stretch the midfield line and the defensive line, create the space to then get the ball into, find the person in that space, and then attack through that space. Whereas with Newcastle, it was very different, right? It was, and again, personnel is incredibly important. I'm glad that Elliot highlighted that right at the beginning. Christian Mosquera in that Forest game was unbelievable because he's the kind of player who invites. You need someone who baits pressure to play in those kinds of ways, and he has the ability to do that. Has the ability to wait until the last moment before he lays the ball off. He has the ability to be patient, to read the game well enough to see where those tensions can be found. Find all of those ways of baiting triggers through things like I talked about centre back staggering. So making sure one of your centre backs is further forward, playing the pass on the diagonal backwards because that is often a trigger for opponents to press. But also the ability to disguise his passes and play passes around the corner as well into space, so you're getting through the first few lines of their pressure into the space that you're opening out. And I thought that was really noticeable from him in that game. But then in the Newcastle game, yes, you're also wanting to play quite directly, but I think the issue with I mean, I guess you could have done it with Newcastle and tried to bait them out a little bit more. But for me, it was very, very clear that you wanted, as Clive said, to get the wide forwards narrower, push your fullbacks further up, into that space between the lines, and just give your build-up unit then targets to aim at between the lines. You end up with those 5 players in spaces, and then it's just a case of firing it through the lines of the Newcastle mid block, and they sit in this really tight mid block, and it's tough to get through. But again, I thought it was directness. And it was proactivity, but in a very different way to the directness and proactivity of maybe it was more passivity against Forest, where you had to be patient to create the spaces. Where in this situation, it was more about finding the space in between the lines, using the players in that space almost as a backboard. I think Harry Gratian has used that phrasing of the particularly like players like Eze, who can receive the ball back to goal but just immediately feed the ball to someone else. So you're taking the pressure from the centre back behind you, but then moving the ball on quickly. It's just a different way of doing it, but it's equally effective as well. And I think these are the sorts of things that make me feel pretty confident about my prediction at the beginning of the season that Arsenal may win the league this season. So.
You're invited back on. You've saved yourself from the prior defensive comment. I think it's interesting to watch the different ways we can do things now. And if you look at how Leo Trossard's been playing, I think that's actually a bit of a preview of what Eze's role might be, because he's not holding the width. He's coming inside. Clive called this out, but it was a box midfield against Newcastle, right? It was a double pivot, but then Leo and Eze were creating the box there. Mm-hmm. And what that does for a channel runner like Gyökeres, who liked the left-sided channel, is if the defender follows Leo inside, then Gyökeres has space to run into behind. And that's been a really interesting dynamic. We saw a bit of that against the team we just played in the Champions League. Olympiacos. As Tim says, these are the games you'll forget by next season. Tim, I've forgotten it already. And look, it is important, though, for people that have been critical of Mikel maybe being cautious, your rest defense in that shape is so important. A great example of that is there's no worse manager when it comes to rest defense in the Premier League right now than Ange Postecoglou. And if you watched Forest play Midtjylland, they lost the ball in a central area, and Midtjylland had a 3v1 immediately going the other direction. And the screenshot of it's just embarrassing, and it looked like his Spurs team again. And it's the idea that, yes, you've got to attack, but you cannot be conceding 3v1s the minute every time you lose the ball. So one thing, John, that I'm just sort of curious about, there had been a little bit of anxiety, I think, in some Arsenal circles around the way Marino was being used in some games and the midfield that was being deployed with Marino and Rice together with Zubamendi, and a suggestion that was cautious. I think if you watch those games, Marino's role wasn't a cautious role per se. What's your thought of the dynamic of that midfield? And do you agree that it might be too functional, or do you see something in Mikel's approach there that might point to what he wants to achieve when he rolls out that trio?
Yeah. I mean, from memory, I think there was reasons why he had to run with that midfield, right?
Just availability.
Availability. Yeah. So I think with that in mind, you sort of are more forgiving of the setup at the beginning. But yeah, I mean, you want players between the lines. You need to have a midfielder between the line. If you're going to play this more direct football where you're creating space between the lines, you need to have the players who can receive back to goal, receive on the half turn and manipulate the space and are good in tight spaces, right? And I think Marino is, I think he's okay in those situations. He's not Eze, he's not Odegaard, it's sort of comparing apples with oranges to then say, well, why is Marino not doing what these guys are doing? So yeah, I would always be wanting to have, one, if not two, more creative players in that space. And I think the test this season is going to be how many times do we see maybe Zubamendi being played with an Eze and an Odegaard as an option in front of him.
Or a Rice in that role, maybe.
Sure. And we saw that against Olympiacos, right? And
against Newcastle late.
Yeah, with him sort of playing as almost as the left eight, like he was doing more last season, I think. But I think, I certainly think that as you said, the recruitment this season has been towards getting more of those players in who are good back to goal, technical players, tight space players, and I think that Arteta will want to get those players into the starting lineup when he can. So in many respects, I guess the Marino, Rice, Zubamendi point is maybe a bit moot. I do feel as though sometimes, so for example, in the Newcastle game, I feel as though sometimes the midfield has to fit around Rice's weaknesses a little bit more. I'm very aware of the fact that I'm on an Arsenal podcast. I don't want to dig too deep into this, but
our audience are very polite, John. Don't worry about it.
So that's very good of them.
Not been my experience, but Clive says different stuff than I do, so you may have a different experience.
Yeah, well, always thankful of nice audiences, but I do think that some of the issues that you have often come from having to fit Rice in certain ways, and then having other players sort of mitigate some of his weaknesses. And he does have weaknesses. I know that the temptation is not to talk about them. But for example, in the game against Newcastle, it felt as though Zubamendi was having to do a lot of the between the lines stuff, which I think reduces some of his strengths, which I would see as being like the tempo setter at the base of the midfield, who is dictating the play, and then having Rice doing that as well, maybe starting out, dropping out into the first line of build-up, either between the two centre-backs or as almost like a left-sided centre-back, and then stepping forward. And I think there's a few areas like that where I'm a little bit sceptical about how things are. But again, against Newcastle, I think the primary objective with Rice was to get him into good spaces to be able to defend transitions. And I think if you do that, you have to introduce him into the build-up in some way. So yeah, the moments where I think Arsenal have been best this season in build-up have been when they've used either Miles Lewis-Skelly or Calafiori as inverted fullbacks. But you couldn't do that against Newcastle because you had the box midfield that Clive's talking about. So you need your fullbacks to be going up and down, and that means then that you need to have Rice involved in the centre a little bit more, and you want to have him in a deeper position because you want him to be able to do those transition moments like the one he had with Jacob Murphy. So again, this is like the pickiest of tactical like problems to have, right? Because essentially what you've got is a lot of very good players who you're trying to fit in different ways to fix tactical problems that opponents are giving you, and you definitely have the players to do that now. And you mentioned, like, there's even players that we've not seen this season. Kai Havertz, a fantastic player, a much maligned player in my opinion, but the perfect counterfoil to someone like Victor Gyökeres. You now have two strikers who are, you know, regardless of what your opinion on Gyökeres is, you have two strikers who are easily like Premier League starting level players. With completely different skill sets. The ability to be able to rotate two strikers like that is remarkable. And again, it gives you something else in games where maybe you want to go direct and you want to win second balls in the spaces that we're talking about between the midfield and the defensive line of the opponent. Havertz is a great player to have as a backboard player to knock it back into those spaces and then to move from there. Gyökeres is great if you want to run channel balls from your striker, and we saw what he can do in the Leeds game. He scored that goal that was, you know, classic Gyökeres. So again, the way to think about Arsenal this season is to think about it in terms of tactical diversity. I think a lot of fans want to think of football in terms of like, this is our incredible starting 11 and we play these players, you know, as our starting 11, and that's what the best teams always have. But in the Premier League right now, it is all about tactical diversity. Everyone can beat you, and if you have the ability to have like a rolling cast of players who can solve different problems, that is going to make you so much more dangerous as a prospect in the league than just starting the same 11 of players week in, week out.
See, well, like Johnny, I get a lot of stick for saying the starting 11s don't bother me much. What does bother me is the game plan and how we adapt to something changes. Yeah, it does bother me. If we pick 15 left backs, of course it bothers me. But within that context, it's more or less understanding why we pick certain people.
Don't tempt Mikel. He will go buy 15 left backs.
There's always space. There's always space for another left back. Let's be honest, you know.
Just like there's always a space for me to have another donut. There's always space for him to have another left back. Yeah.
There's some interesting points. Obviously, fans, as fans mostly, what we try to think what we went wrong last year, what we need to get better at. So everyone's thinking, when we have too many touches, we don't want that. We need to go quicker. So funny enough, Mosquera, I thought, did a brilliant job against Forest. There were some grumbles in the crowd when he held that ball, John. You know what I mean? Because people are thinking, why is he doing that? So it takes a bit of time for the education to seep in, to sort of say, okay, now I know what he's doing. So that was quite interesting. And actually, I think on Marino, I think you actually helped me realise why he was starting. Because of that whole drop people in and then exit, he's better at pinning and holding the ball on that first receiver than Gyökeres is. Gyökeres hasn't quite worked out yet how to buy fouls of Premier League referees. He's too muscly, he's too big, and the referee's just saying, get up, mate. So he's not getting the foul, or he's not able to get the layouts all the time. So I think Mikel wanted Marino there to almost be like a 9.5 next to him to sort of help retain the ball once we've gone over. I think once the game plan changed, we needed someone between the lines. Sorry, once they scored, needed someone between the lines to create. Wrong player, wrong time, and so he had to come out of there. So I do think fans are getting quite smart now and wise about what we need to change, but they have to realise that they can't see it all the time. We have to work to that phase of the game that we want to deliver that in. And I'm a big believer in the 5 subs rule is now really starting to have an impact in the game. And it was always said when it came in, it would suit the bigger clubs. Well, actually, we're now that bigger club with people who are in street clothes that look like really good players that can't actually get into the squad or injured at the moment. And I think it's going to be a significant advantage for Arsenal to be able to make the right changes. But also, I think it's been a significant stick to beat Mikel with, because now he has options. You better pick the ones I want, mate. You better pick the ones I want. Well, Elliot wants 22 number 10s in the team. And I'm a bit more pragmatic. So you're getting that balance between what the expectations are on the sideline versus keeping the handbrake on per se.
It's tricky as well if what you're doing is constantly reading opponents and trying to find upside. And this is why Pep Guardiola has been the greatest manager probably ever, because he treats the game as a relative game. It's never just what are Man City doing. It's always what are Man City doing against our opponent. And I think in those situations, you're always having to make tactical gambles to an extent, because you're having to guess what the opponent is doing, and you're having to find then solutions in your own setup to some of those issues. Now, if the opponent comes out and does something completely different, you're in a scenario where you will have to change things up mid-game. And this is something that, for example, I think Arne Slot is pretty good at. He's pretty good at making the changes at half-time to fix the problems that have opened up in the first half. And I think sometimes fans are critical of coaches when they are slow to make changes like that. When often I think the reality is that you make your tactical bed and you have to lie in it for the first half for a lot of the time. And the fact of the matter is, whatever else you can complain about with Mikel Arteta, I think he's one of the few managers who is very good at making these sort of upfront plans, which generally work out. You can argue with the selection. Sometimes it's, as we've said, it's to do with availability, but I do see Arteta as a student of Pep in that respect, that he reads the game really well. He prepares, he has his plan and acts it. Sometimes he may get that wrong, but he has the ability to fix it as well. And it's kind of like my argument with all football fans would be, what do you want from your manager? I mean, for me, Pep is the second best manager in the league, comfortably, I would say. And we all know that Guardiola right now is like shaking a little bit in terms of like having to deal with the new metas that we're seeing. There's a world where Pep was also that Arteta was also struggling in the same situation, but he hasn't, right? Why? Because he made that evolution towards physicality ahead of Pep Guardiola, right? So I think that you've got to have a certain amount of faith in your coach when he has shown himself to be, one, adaptable, two, ahead of the curve, and three, seemingly willing to be diverse in terms of his approach. I think with Arteta you get all three of those things, and there's not many coaches in world football who have those things as well. So I'm hugely positive about Arteta. I think sometimes he overcorrects one way or the other, but he always changes again in the future, and you just have to wait for that next swing of the cycle, right?
Yeah. See, that is the thing, the point you made about overcorrecting. I mean, Mikel Arteta, that everybody says, oh, you learn, mistakes are great because they're an opportunity to learn from your mistakes. Every failure is the mother of future success. I don't know. There's some, what's the word I'm looking for? Aphorism or something. Yeah, something like that. But like, Mikel has definitely taken the scars of past failures and corrected, and some might say overcorrecting, right? So that game at the Etihad where we got run through, what did he do? He beefed up. He added a lot of strength. He had a lot of solidity. We had an injury season last season. He went out and he bought 1 billion players this season, so we won't be hurt by that, right? He's definitely made the corrections. I think about chess a lot, which is because I was a globally ranked chess player once, and he says lying. But chess is an interesting thing because I think chess, like football, you have players, you have positions on the chessboard, right? Chess pieces, they're called in the game for those who are not familiar, that have very specific and clear roles. And then you have pieces that are a little more complicated, like the knight. And anybody who's played chess knows the knight moves in a very weird and interesting way, and it can be deployed in weird and interesting ways. And I think the knight of current football is the fullback, because there's so many different ways these clubs are using them, and they have so many different roles. Look at what PSG do with their fullbacks. Is Hakimi a fullback? Is Nuno Mendes a fullback? Like, where do they go? What do they do? What is Gvardiol for Pep? Look at Liverpool struggling to try to figure out what their identity is going to be at fullback. Look at us with Miles Lewis-Skelly tucking in, or Calafiori going and roaming all over the place. Ben White can overlap. Timber can shut everything down. And Clive, I think this is such an interesting part of a tactical evolution too, how you manipulate space and create opportunity with fullbacks. And this is why your rest defense is so important, because if you're going to give your fullbacks these interesting roles, your shape out of possession better be good enough to support it. Mikel is doing such interesting things with that position. Liverpool struggling a bit with theirs. So I think that's an area we could just zero in on for a second. So do you have thoughts on how we're using fullbacks and the various fullback profiles? Because we haven't even seen Nkapie yet, who's a totally different one, who could give us that overlapping back in a more direct way. So what do you think of that?
Yeah, so I have some weird views about fullbacks and shapes of
Careful what you share on the internet, mate. People are going to jump on you when you share weird views on the internet.
You see, it's interesting because when Liverpool bought the two fullbacks, I sort of smiled to myself because I see fullbacks as almost like stabilizers and balance creators, right? So if you're on a bike, your fullback your stabilizers, if you can't ride it, keep you balanced, right? So I see fullbacks that way. Almost see if you look at a picture in my own head, it's almost like two circles, one inside the other, with a line going down the middle. The outside circle's your exterior, and your inside circle's your interior. You different skill sets of players on the interior to the exterior. You want your exterior protected, maybe some more of the athletic players out there that can travel both ways, and distances are bigger. And I look at Liverpool's fullbacks, and I don't see them protecting the team. I don't think they're strong enough to hold the exterior. And I don't think they're dynamic enough to really be an attacking balance creator. And I think going forward, Liverpool maybe have not improved as much as they thought they would do at this point in time. And so for Arsenal now, I think we are adding layers to our fullback. I think it helps to have Calafiori fit because he's so all court. He can do so many things and arrive in different areas. And he's not scared. When I used to play football, mate, there were certain zones. If I went in there, I'd be petrified. These players today just go anywhere they like, and they look like that player, like the shirt number changes, and it's just fantastic to see. So I think we've got a level of variation, diversity, and physicality in those spaces. I think that's really important. We tend to do one big fullback, one little one. So we have Ben White and Lewis Skelly this week, Calafiori and Timber. And Timber's 5'10" with muscles, but he's seen as a smaller one in our team. And I think that's really important to have three strong players that can help defend set pieces, but also attack set pieces as well. And so, yeah, he's got it right. He's got the balance right for me. And I do think it's a key part of the team. I did read something, I heard something the other day, that the way Newcastle used Dan Burn was really, really interesting. So they wanted him there, obviously, for the physicality, for the size. They're probably the only team in the Premier League bigger than us. And so they wanted to compete with us in both boxes. But from a on-the-ball point of view, Arsenal sort of let him have the ball. And they stayed narrow, and I allowed them to stay narrow longer. So when the ball goes out to him, we just jog out there and go and get you when we're ready, because you'll take 15 touches to get it under control, sort of thing. And so by them wanting the physicality, they actually weakened themselves from a build-up perspective. And then eventually, as the game went on, I thought they felt comfortable in their physicality, and they dropped away too early. And John said that they kept going at us and put Rice's build-up under more pressure. They may have got some joy, but they didn't. And this is it. That's the game plan, isn't it? Eddie probably dropped off too soon, and he knew it. Odegaard comes on and punishes him for dropping off too soon. Mikel Arteta brings on Odegaard, says, "You've dropped off, mate. I'm going to put Odegaard in 6. Now what are you going to do?" And this is what's so important. Hence why I don't worry about the team that starts. I just worry about the game that's on offer.
As long as you make the changes quickly enough and respond to the game on offer quickly enough, I totally agree. I think there have been games, maybe the Liverpool game, a good example, where Mikel waited just that bit too long. After that, the changes Liverpool made to bring on what's-his-name in midfield, and he was finding pockets of space in behind, and we needed to reconfigure a little bit. That what's-his-name? Good player, by the way. John, well, so do you want to just weigh in on the fullback concept, and you could feel free to phrase your answer in the form of praise for my chess analogy if you want. That's going to be fun.
Yeah. I think the fullback situation, again, it's about flexibility, right? You have the ability to do whatever you want from in the wide areas, really. And we've seen games where Calafiori has played on the left and floated everywhere. And actually, those were the games where I thought Arsenal's build-up was probably the best. When it was sort of Calafiori and then Rice filling in the spaces where Calafiori left and making sure that you just had the benefits of flexibility and fluidity, which I think we should mention that that's super important in build up these days, because teams are man oriented for the most part. And as Clive said, the way that space opens out now is completely different, not least in the fact that, teams used to play in these zonal systems where the space was between the lines in a way, whereas now the players are oriented to individuals, and so you have to create space by generating separation between your man marker and yourself. And I think Calafiori is absolutely fantastic for that, in that he makes it very hard for opponents to press high against you if he's going to be floating everywhere. The worry about the flexibility is always, well, that weakens our rest defense structure. But then if you've got Rice there, it solves that problem. And I think the games where I think Arsenal have been at their best this season in terms of the build-up have been when they've been able to use that dynamic of Calafiori moving around in between different zones, and Rice almost like fitting in the opposite spaces that he's leaving open, and that's been great. But like you say, the ability to have, Julian Timber, who's come in and been a fantastic player, particularly this season, but then have Ben White coming in off the bench and doing the stuff that we've seen, the wide triangle stuff where you get Saka, Odegaard and White rotating and teams just picking apart the edge of opposition blocks, which is such an important thing to do when you are up against a low block. The ability to have those two types of different players and, Miles Lewis-Skelly, who you can play essentially as a central midfielder dropping out into a fullback area, the ability to use him as a midfielder if you want in the future. So again, more tactical flexibility. And we've not even talked about Hincapié, who I think offers a bit more of like an outside centre back profile if you want to just sit someone next to the two centre backs and push both of your fullbacks on. Push one of your fullbacks on the other side. These are, again, this is what it comes down to, the ability that Arteta can use, because as we started off this whole conversation with, profiles make tactics, and you have so many profiles available to you, it gives you the ability to make a lot of tactics.
Yeah, and I'm going to invoke the word relationism, and as you can tell just by even me trying to say it, I don't know what it means, but I will say, even just the little bits of Odegaard and Saka we've seen, they're drifting to the left. They're finding the spots where they can create little overloads and opportunities for each other. Saka seems like he has a little bit more license to get out of that fully right-sided role. And again, we got to be careful because small sample sizes produce bad analysis, and Saka's played very little and Odegaard's played very little, but we've seen little bits of it. You need to just look at the goal against Olympiacos the other night, and it's Odegaard in the left half space playing the ball through to Saka on the left wing. Sometimes this stuff happens because you're resetting from a set piece and people just are out of position, but I'll be curious to see if there's more of that. I want to get just a quick bit on set pieces here. Clive, you mind if I stay with John just for a second here? Because I think
John's a guest, mate, and we're here to listen to him.
I have no doubt we will hear more from you. I do apologize for everybody that wanted a Friday night Clive, but I'm flying to Chicago, and so we've got a Friday afternoon Clive and John, which I think is just that much better. But John, in terms of the set piece thing, it's funny because Mikel Arteta and Arsenal have been somewhat ridiculed at times for where's the open play chances, and why all the set pieces. And then, PGMOL decides that their big rule adjustment for the summer is going to be holding on set pieces. And it's like, why always me? Feel like Mario Balotelli of football clubs. But, well, now they got something to answer for because Jurgen Slot has just said in his latest press conference, Arne Slot, that one of the critical ways you can help break down a low block is through set pieces, and that they need to be better at that, and that they will be better at that. So there's an acknowledgement that there's only so much you can do to move around a low block that's really compact, congesting central areas, that's really well organized. You don't have the days now of part-timers in the Premier League or guys that have no business being in professional football defending. The defenders are international class. The goalkeepers, except at Chelsea, are international class. The organization and the tactical management, aside from Ange, is international class. So set pieces have become a way to do it. And when you have the delivery that Rice and Saka have, and you have a player like Gabby who's willing to put his head into those dangerous spaces and has that physicality, it's a clear advantage. So your thoughts on set pieces, and actually I'm just going to add one thing to this. Do Arsenal overdo it at times in being prepared for every situation? Because I know Billy Carpenter has said, if you're the dominant team talent-wise and in possession, more ball in play time helps you have more opportunities to create chances. And we take a lot of time over every free kick, every corner, every throw-in. Is there a balance to be struck between keep doing the corner stuff, mate, because it's working, but also maybe get the ball thrown in faster, get some of those set piece or free kicks going faster? Are we too focused on stoppages of play?
I hope that when people come away from listening to this, the thing they have ringing in their head is tactical diversity. That's what I've banged on about the whole game.
The only thing they're going to have in their head is that you think Declan Rice is an inferior player and has weaknesses. The only thing they're going to have in their head. But please carry on. And it's gone.
So after you've got out of your head the fact that I hate Declan Rice, the next thing that should come into your head should be this concept of tactical diversity. And the reason why diversity is so important from a tactical point of view is it just gives you different angles, it gives you different strengths, it gives you the ability to do things well. And if the opponent does something that stops one of the things you're good at, then you have another alternative solution to that problem. And that's exactly how I feel about Arsenal set pieces. Like, the fact that Arsenal were good at set pieces was never an issue. The issue that Arsenal had was that they were probably not good enough from open play in the last couple of seasons. So to come away from that thinking the issue with Arsenal is set pieces is completely misunderstanding the situation. So, and if everything I've said today, if Arsenal come out and they become worse at set pieces but improve slightly at open play, I still would consider that to be a failure. And that's why I'm constantly talking about Arsenal as not going through a revolution, but through an evolution. They're adding more strings to their bow rather than you sort of making a pick of trade-offs that they think are more or less important at any one point in time. So absolutely, my colleague Mark Carey at The Athletic has just put out a piece about set pieces, and he essentially making the point that there's a correlation between field tilt and shots from set pieces, and it's it makes if you tease out the logic, it's very obvious, right? The more time and possession you have on the ball higher up the pitch, the more likely you are to generate set pieces. The more likely you are to generate set pieces, the more likely you are to have shots from set pieces, and the more shots you have from set pieces, the more goals you're likely to have from set pieces. And so every team who is operating within that elite paradigm of territorial dominance should be focusing on set pieces as a completely legitimate form of scoring goals. And on top of that, the fact that Arsenal lent into the physicality aspect of it, it was a no-brainer that they should lean into those things, because they have the profile of players who can cause problems from them. And the reality is, every team in the world, if they had Gabriel on their team, it's just a cheat code. You have Rice and Saka, the ability to put those balls in. Even Ødegaard did it against Newcastle, just a fantastic ball into the box. You have those two things. That is the most basic thing about set pieces, right? You have good ball strikers, you have good finishers. That equals set piece goals. On top of that, you add all of the other stuff, which is generating chances in more creative ways. So either by creating space around your good ball strikers, around your good receivers in the box, but also doing the thing that Nicolas Jove has done really well, which I think is finding space for players who might not be being as closely marked because they're not considered to be set piece threats, but if you give them space, they will be dangerous, right? So the fact that Martinelli, for example, often gets like back post chances is maximizing your utility from set pieces, right? So add all of that stuff together, and what you do is you generate a way of generating more and dangerous set pieces. I don't think that Arsenal fans should ever be apologetic about that at all. But what I do think is that again, you have to. Maybe the issue there was that Arsenal had lent so far into this like territorial dominance approach that the only opportunities you were really getting were either set pieces or were open play chances that look very much like set pieces. And I think what then starts happening is you become too predictable and you reduce the overall quality of your play, because opponents. I remember the game against Manchester United last season where they went down to 10 men, and it just felt like you had all the possibility in the world to generate stuff through the centre, but you didn't. You just kept going down the wide areas, throwing the ball in, and United. It meant that United could just sit their centre backs in the box, clear everything out, and you looked a little bit toothless. That's why tactical diversity is important, because if that isn't working and you have something else that you can do to an elite level, then suddenly the opposition's like, what can we do? We stop them doing one thing and they come around the other side and do it the other way. So yeah, I think that my position on set pieces in Arsenal is like, go ahead, do it, be the best set piece team in the world, but also find other ways of being more dangerous. That's exactly what they're doing this season. So
yeah, Clive.
Yeah, I'm just listening and nodding away, because I do think we've got a lot of answers now in this group, and there's some things we've not tried yet. And I have to be honest, I didn't think we'd get this far this quickly with just a few signings. It's about the approach has changed. I think teams have recognised that we are the field tilt world champions, and they've started to come onto us a bit more. So what do? We recognise it and go and hit them early and be more direct, and we've got a player that does it. So suddenly some of our strengths are now working for us. People think, I don't want to be near my goal with Arsenal. Why would I do that? They're going to score. They're going to put pressure on me.
Mhm.
And so it becomes much more of an all-round game. And it's far better to watch. I'm walking out the stadium going, what have I just seen there?
Yeah.
You know, it's far better to watch. And I'll be honest with you, I never expected it. I was starting to wonder, even though we've been through different iterations of this team, you know, the Zinchenko iteration, and then the Kai Havertz, Rice and Timber year, and then David Raya coming in. I'm thinking, okay, last year was just a miss. You know, it was just a miss. Forget it. We never had the right players on the pitch long enough to recognise any sort of style.
Mhm.
But then we go to this year, and I'm thinking, what are we going to do? Okay, we're going to get a centre forward that runs a bit. Okay, let's see what happens. You know, but it's just transformed.
Mhm.
It's absolutely transformed to beyond my wildest dreams. It's like, oh my goodness, we can do everything. I think on set pieces, I think we are almost setting a trend a little bit there now. You know, and I think people are starting to recognise you don't get half a goal for a set piece; you get a full goal. You know, and I think we're starting to really make that work to our advantage. But yeah, the thing for me is the variation of play. You know, and so now the measure for me now is, okay, what's game on offer? What is it? Can you take it straight away? Can your players see it? The number one player for that in our team, for me, is Martin Odegaard. I think he sees the game really quick, and then he applies it. So if I need to come out and drop in and ease pressure from the first phase to build up, he does that. If I need to be in the middle to connect, he does that. If I need to be up top for the final pass, he does that. It's like, and we haven't had him for almost a season, really.
Mhm.
You know, then when you see him appear, you think, oh, crikey. He's quite good, isn't he? You know, when he's on it. And so it's going to be interesting to see now how we cope with teams that we struggle with in the next phase of games, teams that maybe take points off us and had draws, etc., that everyone thinks we're just going to win. I think it's going to be interesting to see what we do for them. But I think we're ready, whatever they bring to the party.
All right, let's shift gears to the last two topics, and we can take this one kind of quickly, but I mean, look, there's nothing more cliche than an Arsenal podcast saying, let's talk about what's wrong with Liverpool when they're sitting above us in the table and have already beaten us, right? So let's root this in reality.
The Champions League, and won the league.
Yeah. Let's root this in reality a little bit. But to my eye, there are cracks that have appeared there, and they, much like us, are going through a bit of an overhaul in terms of what they brought in the summer. They lost Trent, and I just don't think there's been an appreciation of how important he was to begin with. I think they're trying a different tactical approach with a more deliberate buildup, and suddenly Mohamed Salah, who had a lot of space to run into last season, is living that Bukayo Saka life of getting the ball when he's 2s and 2v1 and 3v1 against him, and it's not so easy when you're doing that. But in a way, I almost feel like our clubs had opposite summers, and we could have swapped summers and been just as good in the sense that Liverpool could have used a Zubamendi. Liverpool could have used a Mascara. They could have used an Nkapie. They could have used some more defensive solidity, some more, I think, midfield control. I think Gravenberch is a great player, but to my eye, that midfield can still be run through a bit. The fullbacks have not hit the way they expected. Carrick has had a rough start to life at Liverpool. Frimpong is playing right wide forward in the Champions League and not playing fullback. Szoboszlai is their best fullback, but how long can that sustain? So maybe some cracks beginning to show. And if you don't just look at results and look at the goals they've conceded and the difficulty they've had holding on to leads, John, it's not to say that Liverpool aren't very good, because they are. But I'm curious what you think of what Slot's trying to do. What is he trying to do, and how is it maybe working in ways we, as Arsenal fans, may not be seeing, or not working as well as he'd like yet? What's the goal of what he's trying to do?
Yeah, this is a really interesting topic, because I was thinking about this the other day. People love to talk about freedom in football, right? And there's never really a clear indication of what they mean by it. And I think, generally speaking, and I think this is true philosophically, there's a couple of different definitions. You could call one negative concepts of freedom, and a negative concept for freedom of freedom for me would be something like freedom is when we have no constraints on us. We're just able to do what we want, right? And a lot of the discussions about positional play and relationism fall into this kind of concept of like, what does freedom look like? Are you free if you have to do certain things? If you're constrained by certain things, if you have to stay in a position to make sure that your rest defense doesn't collapse, I would call that a negative concept of freedom. It's just sort of freedom from all constraint, and you can just do what you want. But there's also, I think, positive conceptions of freedom as well, whereby you are, and this would be the argument of someone like Pep Guardiola, that, and I know Maresca made this argument midweek, that actually providing players with structure and giving them constraint actually allows them a more sort of directed idea of what their freedom can be, how it can be enacted, essentially. And the reason I mention this is because last season it felt as though Slot was very much the victim of this more positive concept of freedom, right? There was lots of constraints on him. He came into a team that he'd not coached before. He'd had a dynastic coach before him who was doing certain things that would have been different to what he wanted to do. They didn't sign anyone really that was going to play with any sort of regularity. He was coming into a new league. All of these things were sort of constraints on him. And actually, I think he succeeded in the Premier League last season with all of those constraints on him, right? He made a form of a tactical form of football available to his team that allowed them to win the league, essentially. And it balanced off maybe the chaotic excesses of Jurgen Klopp with some of the ideas that Arne Slot himself wanted to bring in. And it was that perfect balance of, we're going to keep the Klopp direct, chaotic attacking. We're going to balance it off with a bit of control, and that control isn't going to be trying to hold the ball high up the pitch like the elite paradigm has been. It was more sitting deeper, moving the ball around your back line and choosing the moments when you're going to go more direct. And it's, getting the balance right, saying we're not going to go at every moment. We're going to defend with the ball deep in our half. But when the moments arise, when the other team overcommits, we're going to find those spaces and go long. And the balance worked out perfectly for them last season. And then what we have is that this summer, where it's almost like you go from that positive concept of freedom to this negative one, where he's almost freed from constraints, right? He's given an incredible amount of money to spend. He's able to bring in some of the best players in the world, start building the team in his image. And it seems to that sort of lack of constraint for him seems to have gone in the wrong direction, and it feels as though there's a bit more confusion about what it is that Liverpool are doing. And that's sort of represented for me in sort of the key signings. You mentioned Trent Alexander-Arnold moving to Real Madrid, and then the creative fulcrum being brought in to replace him is Florian Wirtz. So you're taking a guy who's playing for a team who are doing a lot of deep build-up, who want to find these moments of tempo shift, and Trent Alexander-Arnold is the perfect player for that. Suddenly you're replacing him with a guy who previously had been like a high volume final third touch guy, who's a facilitator, who wants to just get lots of touches in the final third for teams who are doing this territorial dominance. And he's not doing that anymore. So you're already starting to question, well, how does this really fit in with what you were doing last season? The fullbacks that they brought in Frimpong, who seems to be sort of a replacement for Salah during AFCON, but also who can play as a fullback. And then on the other side, we've got Kerkez, who is like a up and down, long busting run fullback. And Kerkez is being used as essentially as an outside centre back in possession a lot of the time, not doing the stuff that he's best at. And then with Frimpong, both of these fullbacks seem to be sort of like ball carrier types rather than possess and pass types, which is seemingly what they would need from their system. And then you look everywhere on the pitch, and you start saying, well, surely this, you bring in two absolutely two of the best strikers in the world. Fantastic! It's great to have that kind of ability to switch between those two as and when you want. But because you brought those players in for a lot of money, you have to start tweaking a tactical system to try and get the most out of them. And then what does this do? Well, it starts having a negative impact on Salah's usage, which is fine, right? That's eventually what you want to happen, because he's going to go at some point. But at the same time, it feels like it's happened too quickly, and they've lost the benefit of that. And then with the Wirtz thing, you have to fit Wirtz in somewhere, and so that's meant you use Curtis Jones on the left wing like they did against Galatasaray. You play Szoboszlai as a right back, and suddenly you're taking players who worked very well in the system last season and then playing them out of position. So you're getting a double whammy of maybe someone coming in and not fitting in so well, and then that having a negative impact on some of the players around him. So I think the reality is that Liverpool have got a lot of tactical problems to fix, and I think that their season is going to depend on how well Arne Slot can fix those. And it from where I'm sitting, it looks like a very difficult prospect to get those things right.
Yeah, I mean, at least until January, I think, and whether they'd go again in January, given what they did in the summer, I'm not even sure. But they're going to have to make it work with those pieces. And John, as you just outlined it, I think that's as clearly as it's been explained to me where the challenges are. So, Clive, I mean, any disagreement on that? You see it the same way?
No, not in a way. No disagreement. I think just to add one other layer. I think, and Slot said it beautifully. He's. I have to say, when he explains football, I really like how he does it. How he explained the Liverpool Arsenal game. He explained it away perfectly at the end after the game. 8 times it's a draw, 1 time each we win. And I thought that's such a calm way to explain it. And I think he said something. He said, one of the greatest things that Klopp gave me was they came 5th and then they came, was it 3rd? And so teams maybe didn't see us in the same way, didn't maybe respect us, paraphrasing. But then from the second half of last season, the teams started to respect them and they didn't accumulate points in the same way. And that maybe continued into this year. Allied to all that you said, John, all the changes that they've had, teams to respect them in different ways. And so I kept wondering, why do they get a chance to run through the pitch and we can't? So and that's suddenly gone, isn't it? The transitional nature of the team doesn't look the same. They're still great athletes and they still generate that momentum at home. And so it is so interesting. And he gets it. He recognises it. Again, I wasn't sure how Arteta would evolve again this season. I am so interested to see how he does it with the pieces that he has. I can't see a path at the moment, but they've got a forward up there that could mask a lot of issues if he gets fit and start hitting the back of the net. And we won't be looking at the system if he starts scoring, And I think maybe those first 5 wins did sort of mask where they actually were. But some smart people, including Jamie Carragher, worked out that this transitional nature of their team and how teams were getting at them was not sustainable. And I think it's going to be an interesting watch who can retain their stability going forward.
Yeah. Well, and we want to be level-headed on a pod like this and be analytical. So I will simply add that I hope it goes terribly for them. Their season collapses and they finish in the relegation places, along with Manchester United. Let's wrap with this, John. We live in a blessed era of endless choice in some of the worst online tacticos you could possibly hope to choose from. If you want to hear and read some big words that no one knows what they mean, man, you are spoiled for choice. But when it comes to people who can explain the complexity of football in a way that it's easy to digest, that's in much shorter supply. And I think the really brilliant minds in football, Clive, of course, among them, I think can articulate those complex concepts in ways that are very accessible. I happen to really like Billy Carpenter, for example, because I think Billy, now to be fair, you better have a lot of time on your hands to read Billy's stuff. He's got some digests he's putting out now, but Billy takes these complex concepts and distills them into language that is accessible. And I think you are absolutely sensational at that, if you don't mind some of the navel gazing that we'll do here for a moment. So kudos to you, because I think your videos are brilliant. And I think obviously you're able to analyze football at a high level, but make the analysis accessible to people who may not have the time or the interest in learning, getting their UEFA A license. Okay. So I'm just curious, for people that want to be better at watching football, I mean, my process I think is pretty effective. I'll just give it to you for a second, then you can give me yours. So like when I'm watching football, I try to be on Discord and Twitter as much as possible, staring at my phone intently. If I hear the commentator raise his voice, I'll look up, and whatever's just happened, I'll assume whether that player made an error or did something well, that they've been the best or worst player in the game, and then note that. So is that your process, or do you do something different? How do you analyze a game and then distill that into the great videos that you create?
No, it's exactly the same as what you do. Yeah,
perfect.
That's what I do.
No notes, 10 out of 10.
Yeah, it's funny. I get asked this a lot, and what I would say is that I don't think there's almost certainly no commonality between all of the people who do a good job of analyzing football. There's not like a magic bullet that's going to allow you to do it. Apart from one thing, I think I would say, which is put a lot of effort in. Like everyone that you've mentioned in passing there in terms of good analysis, those guys have to put the work in. Like I put hundreds and hundreds of hours into what I do. I watch a lot of tape. I try and watch widely and broadly and keep up with what's going on around the Europe. And I think that's the bedrock of it. It's people always come to me and expecting me to just sort of say, yeah, read this book and then suddenly you'll become a genius. It's just not, or watch this guy's video or read all of these articles in Spielverlagerung. That's not how it happens. If you want to be good at this, you have to put the hard yards in. And people, on Twitter,
how does AI fix that for me?
On Twitter, you don't see that, right? You don't see, people don't see the sort of me loading up a third or fourth game after having watched the previous two, and not wanting to, quite frankly. And it does become boring and it does become hard work. if you want to get to the level, you simply got to do it, because and especially for me, working as a general analyst for a media company, I always feel out of my depth coming on shows like this, because you guys absolutely live and breathe Arsenal Football Club, right? And for me, I'm having to do it amongst covering a lot of other teams at the same time, right? So it again, you've got, if you want to be able to shed any sort of insight into what's going on in the game, you need to have that bedrock of just watching the games, learning what's happening, and not. I see so many kids now on Twitter who feel the need to sort of commentate on every little moment of every little game, and that's fine if that's how you want to engage with the game. That's very much the case. But I do feel as though sometimes we need to spend a little bit of time just sitting back and being like, okay, wait for my takes to come. The takes shouldn't come every 5 minutes in a football game. If they are, you're having too many. For me, a lot of these, I feel as though sometimes my takes take forever to come by. And I make a video every Monday morning it's 60 seconds long. It's probably one of the most difficult things I do, to distill something from football that is interesting enough into that amount of time. But also, I watch the game that I analyze basically 3 times in order to decide what those things are. So again, I think that the percentage of time spent working on something to what you actually get out of it is also a little bit misleading as well. So less people think I just sit down and I just like trot these things out, while I'm, I don't know, scrolling through Twitter. That's definitely not the case. So hard work is the answer there. And I guess maybe I was going to say one more thing, but I can't. Oh yeah, the thing I was going to end on is, maybe I'm biased in saying this, but I think the best people in terms of distilling tactical ideas are always the ones who are the best communicators.
Yep.
And I think there's often in football, Twitter there and social media spaces, there's sometimes a lack of realization that if people sound as though what they're talking about is more complicated, then often the things that they are talking about are more simple or can be expressed in a more simple way. And I don't know, sometimes I beat myself up because I feel as though, I spend my life wanting to communicate to just normal people, the people who watch football. And sometimes I feel as though that sort of puts me on the back foot, or maybe a little bit pushes me out of the tactico sphere, because I think, it's just this guy doing his simple short videos here and there. But I remind myself that if people aren't watching your stuff and learning from it, then there's absolutely no point doing it. Like any sort of tactical content is always going to be educational. It's always going to be communication, and those are the 2 things that you really have to get down.
By the way, that's true in management too. I mean, I think Unai Emery understands football and probably understands tactics. I think where Unai Emery falls down is I don't think he's a great communicator. And you hear stories of him exposing his players to 5 and 6 hour video sessions. Yeah. And so eventually what happens with Unai, he comes in, he makes a big impact, but soon his message is lost because players don't want to sit there and listen to dense tactical instruction in 5-hour video sessions. And I think the same goes for us as consumers of football. You don't need to read a PhD dissertation to understand football. You just need to consume intelligent analysis that's articulated in a way that you have access to it. And I think to your point, John, we do an instant reaction at full time of every game, and I love it. It's one of my favorite things to do because emotion is part of football. And if you don't get a chance to deliver the emotion, if it's just cold analytical takes, that's not football. So we give that. But I watch the game a second time before we do our main pod. And a lot of times I find myself thinking, boy, I got it wrong on the instant reaction. Because the emotion of the moment can steal from you the ability to objectively analyze what happened on the pitch. But there's room for both of those things as long as you communicate them articulately. So Clive, your thoughts on that, the analytical process, and not divorcing yourself from the emotion of it, but also not getting caught up in a lot of jargon, which I think is not meant to educate, but actually meant to exclude. And I hate that about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we don't do that, do we? So we try not to.
No,
but
I don't even know the jargon, so I can't do
it. I think it's in
relationalism.
Well, I really like John's last video, and the reason why I liked it because it was also expanded across a couple of games, but also it was the connection to those games was pure. I've come out of a situation where I felt some of the narrative around Arsenal, I didn't think it was pure. I didn't think it was wholly fair. I thought it was influenced and nuanced against us to highlight weaknesses in certain individuals in our club. And I thought, I don't like that. And I saw John video. I thought, okay, this is pure. This is a connection to the actual game. This is how some things evolved. And I thought it was so well timed and something I always talk to. And anyone who's, people come up to me, John, and they say, oh, Clive, how do you do it? How do you do it? And I always say the same thing. Protect your connection to the game. It's individual to you. It's how you connect to football. It's no one else how they connect to it. It's your connection. And if your way, don't let other people influence you so you parrot them. Protect your connection. Some things I do. I mean, I go and watch other levels of football. I watch a lot of non-league football to remind myself of what it's like, real football. I watch rugby again against a territory game, and I remind myself of things like this. I watch a bit of NBA because how they manipulate space in NBA, move the ball in triangles, things like that. And all these influences sort of help me build a picture for football. And that's how I do it. I don't expect other people to be at my non-league club watching the things like that. But that connection, I need to own it. You know, even when I was doing coaching badges, I almost stopped because I thought, I'm starting to sound like an FA coach, and I don't want to use that terminology. I want to sound like the North London bloke I am, right? So I think that's really important. So owning that connection for me is key, and it's yours. And it doesn't matter what you know; it's your connection and how you build it. And I just thought your last one in particular, I've obviously watched all your work, John, was really timely and really pure, and I really, really appreciate it.
I think it's so important that you say that, I think, because at the end of the day, I'm just a bloke who watches football and says what I see. I've been lucky enough to make it into the mainstream media by like focusing on things like out of possession, the out of possession side of the game, right? Which most people don't care about. But I got into it. I loved it, and I've been lucky enough to be able to share my love of the out of possession side of the game to people. And I feel like now the general populace is better educated on the out of possession side of the game. And I think that's, for me, that's exactly what you're talking about. Like for me, I just was authentic about the things that I cared about in football. Yeah. I talked about why I cared about them and why I thought they were important. And as a result, other people found those things important and worth caring about. And I think if you're not doing that, if you're just trying to, and I understand, look, I'm so privileged to have the platform that I have. I can say things and people will listen, or I can not say things for a long time, come back and people will still be there to listen to me. And I understand that the people on Twitter who want to make a name for themselves feel the need to be constantly first and constantly put stuff out there. But I love that point that you've made, Clive, because what it is saying is that if you do what you do well and you care about it enough, and that probably means you will do it well, then other people will listen and they will find it interesting and they will want to hear what you've got to say.
Yeah, that's a great stopping point. I think it's very well said. And I just want to say, in terms of understanding what it is to be privileged with the platform that you have and the community you have, it goes without saying that I think we are incredibly fortunate that people are patient with us, that they see the best in what we're trying to say, that they help drive the conversation with us in a way where we learn, that they not just respond in a positive way, but they also respond to things like the fundraiser when we raise money for the Zattery Camp and the Arsenal Foundation, and things that we're able to do. So I'd be remiss if I didn't say that your point on feeling privileged to have the platform you have goes very much for us as well. And we want to thank everyone who's listened to this and who's part of this community for being as sensational as you are. And we appreciate you. So I've enjoyed this immensely. I hope you guys both feel that you learned a lot from me today.
Thank you, Elliot.
And I would say that there are a couple of things I picked up too along the way.
Get those textbooks out again, John.
There you go. There you go. If you need me, you know where to find me. But no, all kidding aside, absolutely brilliant stuff. So Clive, thanks, man.
Thank you very much.
John, an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. Yeah,
it's been brilliant. Now, I'm in a bit of a sticky spot because we're going to put this out ahead of the West Ham game, but then we're going to put it out wide after that. So I have to know which outro I'm going to do, which puts me in a weird spot, but I'm going to do the regular outro for the time that I'm doing it. So thanks, everybody. We love you. And we will talk to you after Arsenal 10, West Ham 0.